So today we're going to be talking a bit more about Express. We're going to be talking more about routing. How can we actually create dynamic routes? Last time we looked about how we can hard code things, but oftentimes we want to be able to receive more dynamic parameters from the user. We'll be looking at query parameters. And then once we've talked a bit how to set these things up in Express, there's a tiny exercise for you guys to do. Then we'll go into something called middleware in Express that essentially allows us to do something for every request without actually having to worry about the individual request. For example, this could be checking that the user is actually logged in or has access to do something. Yeah. And then we'll be looking a bit at how to use Postman, which is a very, very nice tool for working with making HTTP requests without actually having to set up some more code to execute the request. Yeah. A Postman allows us to very easily debug and see what's going on. And during Postman.
I think I heard that before.
You probably have. And then we'll be looking quite a bit in which order is things getting executed. And we talked about some of these as part of the JavaScript module 2 or the JavaScript modules. Because JavaScript is asynchronous all the time, which means that just because you wrote A, B, C in the code doesn't mean it won't execute them CBA. So let's start out very, very simple. I'm just going to presentation mode here. So this is the code we had last time. Let me just create a copy of that. Open with 2. So we can start by clearing out most of that. So again, first thing first, we always need to have access to Express. Just like last time, we just do a require and we'll get access to it. We need to create our app instance, which is just calling Express like a function. And then to listen something, we can use app.get data. Let me just get the order correct here. Request and response. And then to answer, we can just do response.send hello. And if we run this, that won't work because we need to actually listen. There we go. Then we can see if we open our browser, go to 8000 and go to /data, we get hello back.
I got the same thing. Cannot get /. What was that about? I was doing that.
Because you don't have. If I'm doing this is. Let me just zoom in a bit. Not that one. This one. If I just do this, it's the same thing as doing this. So with a / there, it's exactly the same thing behind the scenes. And why you get that error is because you don't actually have anything that listens to that. So if you do app.get / request response, and then we do rest.send world, and actually restart the program, then we can see, then we actually get something back.
So that's because there's no index file, because index would be loaded by default.
Yeah. On normal web servers, not on Node, because Node doesn't have a principle. It doesn't understand index files.
Okay.
You would have to code up logic for that if it had to. Usually something like Express has a utility we can use to do that. I think it's called Express Static, which will do most of that logic for us if we need it.
Why 8000?
Because that's on your computer you have, I think it's like 65,000 ports or so you can use, and we need to specify we listen on one of them. Usually when you talk to a web server, you listen on, that's it, port 80 or port 443 for HTTP and HTTPS respectively. And on some machines you need to have administrator access if you want to go below port 1000 to listen. So we just listen on 8000 because there's nothing that uses this. Usually we say that anything above 1000, that is for development purposes and you shouldn't really using that. So it's a port we know is usually free. We can just not specify anything and it'll just pick a random available port on our computer. but that makes it pretty annoying to find and talk to, because every time we restart it, it will get a new port. And we need to specify the port when we're writing it up here. If we don't specify anything, it'll go to port 80, which, as you can see, I have an IIS running on, which is why you get all of this. And same problem here, I'll probably just get nothing.
Yeah, no, my hosting server, they run SSH on port 16,000 something.
Yeah, but that's also like things that you expect people to easily access. HTTP, for example, use that on a standard port. Things you don't want them to be able to access, move that away from a standard port, because that means they at least have to check all your ports to find it.
Yeah.
So that's one way of doing it. But like these routes, they're pretty boring. They can't do a whole lot. They can say hello and they can say world. So what? What if we wanted to return JSON from these? Well, we can actually just literally add in an object here. So we can do name Rasmus, for example. And then if I run that, go request /data, I'll actually get a JSON object back. This is JSON. As you can see, there's quotes around it here. There were not quotes around the name here. So it has actually converted it into JSON for us. This is all well and nice, but I want to be able to actually pass in my name here. I don't want it to just always return Rasmus. So what I can do is that I can do this. This special syntax tells Express that in this path, this part here is dynamic and will be passed in by the user. And I think the way of accessing it, doing request.params, we can just try to log out the request object and we can probably see it. So if I go up here and then request /data let's just go with most of my last name. And if we see down here, we can see that, all right, it had a route, it had a whole bunch of parameters. Because yay, debugging. Yes, so that was what I thought it would. So we can do params.name. And then if we restart again and reload, go back, we can see that's actually logging it out down here. So if I change it to who shall we sacrifice, Ricardo again, and it'll log out that. And same thing, I could return it here. So I could do rec.params.name, restart, and then we would actually get it back in the response. And then if I did my last name again, we'll get all that back. So this is one way that we could accept parameters from the user. We can have things after, so I can have let's say I just have this standard, and then I have
that's useful for user profiles.
Yes, exactly. That's what Twitter does, for example. You do Twitter/Rasmus and you'll get my Twitter profile.
Yeah.
Not mine anymore because I was not early enough for that. But ideally. But say we want to have, alright, so we have this just logs out the name, but we want to have another one that is dance. So we'll have a parameter that's saying, a response that's called dancing, and he's doing the Wookie, whatever that is. So that here we just keep getting the same thing, because this is matching the first route, as we call it. It's matching /data/name. It's not matching the same one. But if we now do append dance, you can see we get more back. And I can change it here because you can see the name is still Hansen. So if I change it to cat, we get that back, but still the dancing parameter. What if we want to take another parameter? I want to take the kind of dance. So we do kind. If I can actually move my screen, so then we can do rec.params.kind. So doing the plus whatever that is. And then I can add some more here. So disco, we can do the, what's another kind, the boogie, however that is spelled. As you see, we can take multiple parameters this way. So some of the parameters can be dynamic, while others can be hard-coded. we could also just have two dynamic parameters directly after each other if we wanted to, like this. And restart that. So now, if I just do this, it'll say there's nothing here that matches. But then if I now do this, none. Cat's doing the dance. Cat is now doing the disco. And so, what parameters we receive here, it's just separated by the slash. Any questions so far to this? How we can use it, how limitations, anything on that?
I'll be curious that how we're going to use that to interact with the database.
Well, we might have something, for example, that like doing the profile thing is a good example that we take in the profile as part of the parameter. But sometimes you also just have the ID of something. So rather than just receiving that, we could have users and then just the ID. Finding user with ID. And then we do users/42. Finding user with ID 42. Very big number. And then we just take in the IDs that we're looking for in the database. This is something called a bit more REST, which I think we'll get to in one of the later lessons, how to design a proper REST API. And doing it is really part of this because we say that each individual URL represents one specific data point. And it represents the same data point every time. So if I go to twitter.com/Rasmus, it's my profile that you'll get back. It's also my profile that you'll get back if you open it on another computer, in another way, part of the world. Still the same thing it points to. It's the same resource, as we call it. And doing it like this makes it very easy to read, well, what are we actually looking for here, rather than sending it along as a form post, which is another way of doing it. The benefit of this is that, like, now that this is in the ID, I can just keep pressing refresh, and I'll just get whatever the latest data is, if the data changes, because it's just the same URL every time. So it makes it very nice to read. Another way of doing parameters entirely. So let's just add a data2 route. Is the bit more traditional, what we call query parameters. I would assume it would be on query. Let's just do rest.send. Okay. So now if we go to data2, and then we can add in a parameter here, so we can go for name equal Rasmus. Let's just see if I remember. I did remember correct. So now if we just log out the query. So now I specify what we call query parameters over here. They're specified after the question mark. Your query parameters start. If I want to have more, I just add in an ampersand, and then I can do last name, Hansen, and then I get multiple parameters. One downside of these is that there's really no structure for nesting them. So I can't do, say, user.name equal Rasmus. Some people might expect that to then have inside the outer object, there's a user object with a name property. That's not what's going to happen. They're flat.
Yeah, because it's JSON, it will be converted into string.
Yeah, exactly. This is the key. This is the value. It just key values there. So when would you use one over the other? Which is a very obvious question coming out of this. So say that we had a route that gave us a list of users back. Let's actually try doing that, because then you can really see how we can work with these things a bit more. You said you wanted me to comment these out rather than delete them, so we'll do that. So let's say we have a list of users. We have user with ID 1 who has a name of Rasmus. We have a
Just a quick question. It's not really.
Yeah.
We haven't looked at SQL injections yet.
no. We'll get to that in either the next module or the module after.
Because that's what they use. Like when I remember that when you
Yeah.
go to the URL.
As,
that's when
anytime you receive something from the user, don't trust them. Users are idiots. They'll break your shit, and then not even talking about the people who are attempting to do it intentionally. So don't trust anything you get from the user, no matter how. If it's from the query parameters, if it's from the path, if it's from a form post, if it's from JSON, if it's not from yourself, don't trust it. Like I would go almost as far as saying, even if you get something from a colleague who built another part of the system, don't trust it. Like, unless it's literally coming out of your own code from a previous function call, don't trust it. And how can we then do this? Because that's going to be real annoying. We'll get to that as part of the database course. It has something called prepared queries that allows us to just say, you just handle that for me, database. These two things are parameters in my SQL query. Here are the values for each parameter. Go figure out how to put them in there without breaking something. So we'll make it someone else's problem, essentially. So let's go with Ricardo. Who do we else have? We have Sina. Yes. And we have not me again. And how do I spell? How do I spell that? M-E?
M-E-R. Merhawi.
R first. M-E-R.
M-E-R.
Hawi.
H.
H-A-W-E or I?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yes.
Good. Like I don't want to butcher your names too much.
Yeah.
So here we have a very, very fancy list of users, and they are the only users in the system right now. So if we want to make something so we could explicitly get data about Sina, we would do app.get. We would make a route that said user. They'd have an ID, request response, and we want to get the ID, so we do request.params.id. Then we find the user, so we do user.find u.id is equal to ID. It's gonna yell at me and I don't care. And then we do res.send user back. So this is very, very simple. We can have an ID in the parameters, in the path. We read that ID, we find a user that has this ID, and then we send it back to the client. Hopefully, if everything works, at least. So now if I go here and request user/3, I think it was, we'll get Sina back. If I go for 2, we'll get Ricardo back. For 1, we'll get me back. Go for 4, million or something, we'll get Cat back. And then if I go for 5, we'll get Mahawi back. So this is how I should really have that be a capital letter.
My OCD was telling me, but I chose not to say anything.
So this way we can take in some parameters. But what if we wanted a full list of the users? Like now I can request each one, but now if it's Facebook and they have a billion users, and I'm searching for my friends, I need to test every single ID. That's going to take a while. If I can assume I can test one a second and there's a billion one, it's going to take, I think, roughly 10 years. So we want something, so if you just say users, I just want all of them. Great. So we'll add another one, app.get users, request response. In this case, we can just literally do res.send users, and it'll send the whole list as JSON. No questions asked. There we go. And as you can see, I get a JSON list back that contains all the users. Now, let's theoretically assume that we had 100,000 users in the system. So we want to be able to page through them. Say we only want 2 users at a time. And then I want to specify, well, what page am I looking at? So if we only want 2, this is a good place of using query parameters, because if I wrote 2 here, I get a specific user back, and I don't want that. I want 2 of them. It would make sense to do something like, well, give me 2 users. So I do pass in a count parameter. So now, then I need to read that out down here. Const count is equal to rec dot query dot count, or if there's nothing specified, I want to. This is a little trick you can do in JavaScript, because if count is not specified, the value is undefined if you try to access it, and undefined is false. So therefore it will do the OR and then get the second one and assign it into the value.
Yeah. So it's true.
No, it'll be 2, not true.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It'll be the value 2.
Yeah.
There's also a couple of other things that evaluates to false, like the empty string or 0, false, null, undefined. Will all give you nothing, which means it'll basically just fall over to this. So this is a good way of saying, I want whatever the count is, but I want the default to be 2. All right, then we need.
Because the default is undefined.
Yeah, if I don't specify it. Yeah, because then if count is not set, it will be set to undefined. We can look at how we can fuck this up really badly by passing in cat or dog to this and see it just explode. But we'll look at that later. So we'll go for matching users. That would be the user dot. I think we have a slice. So if I do slice, I can specify the start. So let's just start at 0 and get however many we specified. So now I can run this. So if I go back here, I'll only get 2. If I set this up to 3, I'll get 3 at a time. If I pass in 6, I'll get, there's not 6 elements in the list, so I'll only get 5. But now I specified 2. Now I want the next 2. So I want the ones that is at position 3 and 4. That would be a good time to pass in something like page should be page 2. All right, so we read that out too. So const page is equal to rec.query. It's really annoying that one thing can be magnified and one thing cannot. Page, or if the page is not specified, we just want page 1. Makes sense for everyone. And then because JavaScript and all math that we do in that is actually 0 index, we'll just subtract 1. That means that we'll actually be requesting for page 0, 1, 2, 3 up to the number of pages minus 1. And why are we doing that? Because down here we want to actually start doing math now. So this is when it starts returning values. So this should be how many we want to skip, which is basically page times count. So if the page is 0, this will give 0 and we get from the start. And here we want to say, well, how many should we get? So we should get however many are in count, which is basically page times count plus count. Or some people prefer doing this.
Yeah.
So basically to the start of the next page.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if we go back here, then we see we're actually getting the second page now. If I do go back to 1, I get from what's the first page. If I go to this, I'll get what's on the third page. So this is basically, if you've ever been on a website that had that little, you can select page, this is how they do it behind the scenes. And then of course they pass this to a database, but this is the general idea of how to do it. And it still doesn't conflict. I can still go in here and request user 5 and I'll get Mewahi explicitly. So, any questions to this code right now?
Just one. Ordering. Descending alphabetically.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. But right now, we're very, very fortunate that we're not doing any custom sort, so it'll always return the same order. But if you're doing it in a database, you might want to specify order by ID if they didn't specify anything, or you can do more advanced. But that is basically.
But that would be on the query, wouldn't it, to the database?
Yeah, I can do something like order equal name and direction equal ascending or something. And then it would order by the name in ascending direction. But that is up to you how you want to do it. the API we have at work basically just takes in a sort parameter and then it does something like name ascending or name descending in one string, and then it splits it behind the scenes. So it's very, very much depending on how you want to design your APIs. Some APIs doesn't allow you to sort. You just say, nope, this is how you get it. So it very much depends on what you need and how much do you want, what features do you want to expose your users to. Like in Facebook, I think you can sort by latest and most relevant, however the fuck relevant is defined. But that's basically what you can do. And I mean, for most people that works fine. So, any other questions? To this? No?
In the users that find, it actually finds the first condition that satisfies the condition one, right? What if
So this
are two the same or duplicate?
Yeah, this find will get the first one that matches, and if there's nothing that matches, it'll return null. So if I go up here and then I request users/6, for example, it'll just give me nothing, because in Express when I do send null, just return an empty string rather than write out null explicitly.
That's a good time to put a not found page.
Exactly. So I mean, that would basically saying if user, then send it back, else then res dot do 404 somehow. There's not a function in that for Express, but so you would do something like this. We'll be looking at how we can handle this a bit more generic with something called middleware in a moment, because you might just, I have no clue what the method is actually called, but I think you can do something like status 404, and then you can grab that in the middleware before it's actually returned to the user and say, yes, status 404, but serve them this page that says that nothing was actually found. So, oh yeah, should we look at what happens down here if I pass in completely bullcrap parameters to this?
Why not?
Because that's a good way of making developers hate you. So this thing works fine. Now I go and pass in dog and get, it's just like a there, which is considerably better than what I would honestly have expected. But what it probably does, this ends up being nan, and then I assume if we take nan to nan, not a number to not a number, we'll just get nothing, apparently. Some languages would just have blown up and say, I cannot handle this, go away. But what you should probably do here is that you should probably say something like, okay, if is nan pass int count. So if whatever I get back when I actually try to pass that as a number is not a number, then go send to the user. Error, count was not a number. Do the same thing with page. And then I wouldn't be allowed to send horrible things like that. So if I now then set this to 2, then it'll just give me no, page is not a number, okay, and then we're good to go. So this is, make sure to validate your inputs. Basically goes back to what Ricardo talked a bit about earlier, that you can't trust what you get in from your users because they'll lie a lot. So I think there's actually an exercise in here now, if I remember. Now we have many levels of zoom here. So we've talked about get, path params, and query parameters. We'll get into app.use as part of talking about middlewares. So there's a tiny bit of exercise here now. Last time you started, as part of the exercise, we worked on this tiny portfolio that had an about page and a couple of things, I think. You should add some pages like this, but then you should be able to actually take in some of the things as parameters. So for example, take in a query parameter to educations that says, well, is university true and attended before, whatever. And then you should actually print that out to the page and use the parameters. Right now I've just been returning them as JSON, but you can actually also return HTML. That's what you did last time. Or take it in as a path parameter. Good, let's get started working on that.